Episode 91. A New Student.
It didn't happen in recent years. She probably suffered from radiation more than 10 years ago, and probably took medicine in the middle as well.
The doctor held his glasses and continued.
But because her body has deteriorated in recent years, these symptoms have begun.
Then, Grace pursed her lips and remembered another thing.
The medicine CNS, is that difficult to get? Yes, the laboratory's experimental drugs aren't available in our hospital now.
The doctor's expression changed.
We can only rely on Miss Miller.
Grace's expression became even more complicated after hearing this. She only had time to think about other things when Bertha had recovered. The experimental drug wasn't even available to Thomas in such a short time. So how could Bessy's friend obtain it? How did she have such a friend, and when did she become friends with him? After talking to the doctor, she went back to the ward and stayed for the afternoon. She waited until school was over, in the evening, before she left the ward. She then called Bessy again, but she didn't pick up. She asked the driver to go to Brightbow High School to find Bessy. Brightbow High School. After school in the afternoon, Bessy was called by the teacher again. It was as expected. Bessy was tired and leaned against the wall.
Bessy, are we going to the cafeteria together?
Paul and his friends were discussing how to get into OST's exhibition game and stayed a little longer. Bessy thought about it, put her cap under her table, and took out her thermos slowly. I'm going to the school's doctor's office. She would only be surrounded by people in the cafeteria. Paul nodded. He didn't like to go to the cafeteria recently either.
Then let's go downstairs together.
On the way, Paul and Wendy were talking about Toby.
I remember.
Paul stopped spinning the basketball in his hand.
Bessy, you're a fan of OST too, right? We're going to pretend to be staff members and slip into the performance venue next week. Do you want to come?
Bessy had been affixed with the OST fan tag. She didn't refute further and just said lazily, no. The two of them went downstairs and saw Susan waiting by the side of the road. Cousin! Susan waved at Bessy. Hi, senior. There were several classmates beside her. Paul glanced at her and nodded casually, looking frivolous like a young man. Bessy also stopped, but her eyes narrowed in a frivolous and determined manner as she asked casually, what's the matter? Susan couldn't help but glance at Paul, then she said carefully, Auntie has something to tell you. She's at the intersection outside. Okay. Bessy was expressionless.
Bessy, you can go first. I'll wait for you here.
Paul lowered his head slightly. He was consulting her opinion. Bessy was very calm and put her hands in her pocket expressionlessly. No, you can play your basketball.
Okay.
Paul watched Bessy leave before he bounced his basketball to the court. When the two of them left, the people around Susan were in disbelief. That's your cousin? I feel like Paul listens to her. Susan also felt it and looked complicatedly at Bessy's back. Yeah. Grace's car was parked by the road and was easy to find. What? Bessy asked concisely as she pulled the car door open and got in. Grace was sitting in the back, putting on lipstick with a small mirror. She looked up and said, Are you going to Evanston? Before Grace could finish speaking, Bessy rejected her flatly. I'm not going. Why? Grace paused and kept her lipstick. She didn't understand why Bessy would let go of such a good opportunity. Forget about the Grant family. This was the thing that made her the most troubled. Both of them were her daughters. Now that Anne had found her place, Grace also hoped that Bessy would settle down in an area. Bessy paused and said after a long while, There's nothing good in Evanston. Her answer was almost the same as Bertha's.
You have stayed with your grandma for too long and have become like her.
Grace bit her lip and now regretted having thrown Bessy to Bertha. Bessy was impatient and put her hand on the car door.
Tell me, what's wrong with Evanston?
Grace glanced at Bessy. It's just bad. Bessy directly opened the door and narrowed her eyes, her expression impatient. Don't look for me anymore. She got out of the car and left directly. At night, Bessy came out of the school doctor's office slowly while carrying a pot of water. It was the self-study period soon, and a group of people in the back row of English class was talking excitedly about something. Bessy coughed twice and sat back in her chair. It was rare to see Paul and Kenneth discussing with them. According to Paul, there weren't many things that could make Kenneth interested. Bessy slowly took out a book from under her desk and unscrewed the lid of her thermos.
Bessy, did you know a new student is coming to our class?
Paul saw Bessy and immediately waved at her excitedly.
Do you know who it is?
Bessy wasn't very interested. She replied in a low mood. I don't know. The other people in the class also felt it was strange. Paul's reaction was a little big for a new student. Could this student have some kind of background?
Paul, Bessy is already here, so stop beating about the bush. Someone urged him. Paul glanced at Bessy, put his feet up on the table and smirked. It's a girl. Chloe Harper. Shit, it's her? Thank you, Bessy, thank you. Devil Lewis, otherwise how could Chloe come to our class? I remember that she was in Evanston with OST. How come she came to our school? She's probably back for the college entrance examination. Everyone was speechless. Most people in the class had heard of Chloe. There was a commotion. After Paul finished speaking, he glanced sideways at Bessy. She was still looking down and flipping through her book slowly, her expression unchanged. Paul paused and was quite puzzled. Had he guessed wrongly? Maybe Bessy wasn't a fan of OST. Otherwise, how could she not even react to the name Chloe? The group continued chattering until it was time for self-study. Their exam just ended and there had been many new questions on the test paper that were difficult and took a lot of time to solve. The teachers thought that the time in class wasn't enough, so they made use of the evening self-study. The physics teacher walked into English class with his hands behind his back. He put the papers on the table. Then, he started talking about the multiple-choice questions, which not only needed them to analyze various magnetic fields and particle trajectories, but also various forces. It was complicated and tedious. After finishing one question, there wasn't much time left. The physics teacher paused, took the test paper in his hand and nagged earnestly. If only some people could be better at physics, wouldn't it be easy to get first place? If you get a perfect score for physics, you might even be the provincial top scorer. At that time, numerous famous schools would be waiting for you to pick them. The students had been reattempting the question that the physics teacher had just explained, but when they heard him start to nag, several people couldn't help but lie on the table and laugh. Paul took a bite of potato chips from the boy beside him. After thinking for a while, he poked Kenneth's back with a pen. Kenny, do you think Bessy knows physics? Kenneth's expression was quite cold, and he paused when he heard Paul. Then he looked up at Bessy and his eyes fluctuated before he finally shook his head. I don't know. Bessy's method is too much. Paul was silent for a while. Then he withdrew his hand and leaned on the back of his chair. How could she not write a single word? I can't even tell if her physics is good or not. Of course, none of them could guess if Bessy was good in physics. After all, if she was good at other subjects, she would be good at physics. But they didn't know if her physics was as impressive as her mathematics. Paul glanced subconsciously at Bessy. She was still looking at the foreign book. Paul, when will Chloe come to our school? Paul's deskmate leaned over and asked. Paul looked away. I don't know. You can ask Wendy to ask her uncle. The Smith family's house. Chloe, eat more. The chef cooked it, especially for you. David was sitting in the middle elegantly. Thank you, Uncle. She didn't take much, but her speech and movements all held a sense of supremacy. There was a kind of temperament that the rich families in Chicago didn't possess. Grace returned home exhausted after talking to Bessy and didn't speak at the dining table. Chloe ate a few bites, then put down her fork, pulled out a piece of tissue and wiped her mouth. David reached out for a dish with his fork and turned to look at Grace. Has Anne's performance started? Sister-in-law is already arranging it. Grace felt uncomfortable at the dining table due to Chloe's presence. She always felt like Chloe was a mirror, reflecting all her inadequacies. Last night, Grandpa Perez also listened to Anne perform live. Next week, she'll have a performance and aim to succeed in becoming an apprentice. Grace smiled slightly while speaking of this. I also heard from Elise that Grandpa Perez liked Anne very much. David nodded. Chloe didn't speak. She was indeed awkward with Grace. She was Thomas's cousin, so her sister-in-law had been David's wife. But after she died, it was now Grace. But when she heard David, she raised her head and asked, The Perez family? Grace tightened her grip on the fork and smiled. Yeah. The Perez family is in the electronic network industry and is rather well regarded. Chloe said lightly, Madame, Miss Harper has already been decided on by the World Poker Tour, and she will work with them in the future. She's very familiar with the electronic network industry. Aunt Ruth said with a smile when she brought a cup of tea to Chloe. World Poker Tour? What was that? Episode 92, Number 3. Grace was a little stunned, but she was different from Bertha. She was puzzled, but she hid it and pretended to understand. She smiled. That's great. Chloe picked up her cup and took a sip. She looked at Grace and seemed to see through her thoughts, but she didn't answer. The smile on Grace's face stiffened gradually. Uncle, I'm done eating. I'll go up and rest first. I'm a little tired from the plane ride today. Chloe finished her tea and put down her teacup before turning to David. David nodded warmly and said, "Go and rest. I'll send you to Director Moore tomorrow morning to check your timetable." When Bessy came, he had only sent the driver to send her there. But for Chloe, David had put down his work and was sending her there personally. The difference in treatment was obvious. When Chloe went upstairs, Grace's expression was still in a trance. She didn't know about David's deceased wife. David and Thomas would go to the deceased wife's house every year during the new year, but they never brought Grace along. She only knew about David's deceased wife through the Smith family. She heard that she was from a perfect wealthy family, and the family had moved to Evanston in recent years. Grace knew that she couldn't compare to David's deceased wife except for her looks, so she attached great importance to Anne's education, and Anne also lived up to her expectations. After so many years, it was Grace's first time seeing David's deceased wife's family, so she felt a little uncomfortable and didn't eat much. It wasn't until the evening, when she had a video call with Anne, that she gradually felt better. The next day, David took Chloe to find Director Moore. "We've temporarily transferred Miss Harper to English class from science class because of some matters." Director Moore carried a cup of tea and smiled. "Mr. Smith, Miss Harper, is that okay?" Chloe wore a black coat and her sleeves rolled up and showing her wrist. "It doesn't matter what class I'm in. Director Moore, this is my file." Chloe took out a file and handed it to Director Moore. Director Moore opened it. Inside was a very beautiful resume. Chloe was good in foreign languages and even had participated in debate contests. Her other subjects were also outstanding. She was a dark horse that was likely to compete for the top spot in the city. If her file had been placed in the other schools in Chicago, it would surely be regarded with great importance. However, Chloe had come to Bright Bow High School, unfortunately. First, there was Scarlett, the terrifying dark horse who remained silent but was very stable. Next, there was Kenneth. He was terrifyingly good in every subject and had followed Mr. Scott to participate in the Olympic competitions abroad. Lastly, there was the super dark horse, Bessy, who had emerged suddenly in the midterm exams. Other than physics, she was better than Kenneth in all other subjects in a terrifying way. Now, all the teachers were worrying over Bessy's physics results. Although Chloe's results were good, she was still inferior to Scarlett as of now. Director Moore had even seen Bessy score full marks on a Devon Hoff exam paper, so his expression was quite calm when he saw Chloe's paper. He flipped through it at will and then put it aside. "Go to the teacher later to get a set of school jackets. You can report to English class tomorrow or next Monday." Chloe glanced at her file. Chloe was a little confused that Director Moore's expression had been so calm when reading her files. She wondered if he hadn't read through it seriously, but still hid her shock. Everyone was still in class and there weren't many people walking around campus. David brought Chloe to pick up her school jacket and books, then asked, "Are you coming to class tomorrow or on Monday?" "Monday." Chloe put on a pair of wide black sunglasses and replied, "I don't want to be harassed by a group of people." David knew she was a little star on campus and chuckled. "Isn't that because you're so popular?" The temperature changed greatly at the beginning of November. In the morning, there was a layer of frost and it was hot in the afternoon. But the wind suddenly became chilly at night. Bessy only wore a pair of sandals to the school doctor's office after school. She wore a long-sleeved shirt underneath and her school jacket over it. Michael gave her a new pair of slippers from the storeroom and watched her change into them. He leaned against the door, raised an eyebrow and said, "You're so casual, Bessy." Bessy sniffed and waved her hand. "Just a little." Michael's face was expressionless as he leaned lazily against the wall. "Do you only have school jackets in your closet?" She wore her school jacket in the summer and autumn. It was winter soon, and she was still wearing it. "Yeah, I'm poor." Bessy squinted slightly. She didn't like shopping because there were too many people and it was too noisy. Most of her clothes were bought by Bertha. If she wanted to buy clothes, she would learn from Clarissa and just gather a bunch of clothes from a store and pay for them at once. When she returned to her dormitory at noon, the sun had been so glaring that she had changed her shoes. Who knew that it would be so cold at night? This reason was acceptable. Michael was convinced. But he wanted to know how could she have given her cousin a bag of clothes from the store last time at the school gate. He didn't speak and just turned around to take a blanket before throwing it at Bessy. Then he lowered his head again and thought for a while before sending a text message. The person replied quickly. Michael looked at it, then slowly turned to look at Bessy. After staring at her for a while, he lowered his head and replied to the message. Samuel was sorting out the medical records when he heard their conversation. When he turned and looked over, he saw Bessy's broken sandals at one glance. Casual. Casual indeed. Samuel threw the records onto the table. Marvin and Harvey returned after a very busy day. They heard Samuel say loudly that Bessy had changed her broken sandals. They didn't know how long she had kept that pair of sandals, but they looked very tattered and old. The two of them squatted and looked up after a while, wondering just how poor Bessy was. Bessy had Michael's exclusive blanket wrapped around her as she sat on the chair and poked at a computer. She was motionless. Marvin quickly set the table.
Samuel, when I went out this morning, I think I saw Chloe.
Marvin had helped Samuel obtain OST's tickets, so he was a little familiar with the members.
She seems to have come to Brightbow High School.
Samuel had been eating casually, but he immediately lifted his head in excitement when he heard this.
Really? You saw her?
Michael didn't move and just ate slowly. Bessy thought about the name, Chloe, in her head and remembered that it was the new student in English class. She looked up and asked casually, "Chloe?" Samuel immediately explained to Bessy.
You don't know Chloe? She plays in the poker tournament and is the only woman I admit defeat to. She's a female professional player and is on OST's second team. She has a very fast hand and can almost catch up to the Sun God. She is super powerful and amazing and is ranked number 3 in the OST's team speed record.
While Samuel lauded her accomplishments, Bessy bit on her fork and pondered hard. There was a member named Chloe on the team? Marvin was also shocked.
She's the 3rd fastest in the OST team and she's a female?
Exactly. Samuel was an internet-addicted teenager and a hardcore fan of the team OST. He lit up at the mention of this. Sun God's highest speed is 607. Chloe competed with Sun God and achieved a speed of 500 plus. It was higher than the 3rd place Henry Hayes and set a new record for 3rd place. I've seen the record she left behind.
Impressive.
Marvin had also played this game in university. Although he wasn't as fascinated, he still understood it. Then he sighed. Bessy listened to their conversation and picked up a piece of ribs while thinking slowly. Hand speed was also known as the AMP. It was generally around 300 to 400 for normal professional players. The poker tournament had a very high speed requirement that reached 500, surpassing the average record of ordinary professional players. Then, Chloe indeed had the talent to be a professional gamer. No wonder the team OST had let a girl join them. But all these things had nothing to do with her. After Samuel finished speaking, he looked at Bessy again and put down his fork.
Wait, you don't know Chloe?
Bessy was still eating and responded casually. Yeah?
No. Aren't you a fan of the team OST? How could you not know Chloe, the newest member of OST?
Samuel turned over and stared blankly at Bessy. I already told you I'm not a fan of OST. Bessy took a bite of her food and narrowed her eyes slightly. She looked at Samuel, propped her legs up and raised an eyebrow. You didn't believe me. Samuel wanted to say something when Michael reached out and knocked on the table.
Eat first.
If you're not a fan of OST, why do you have their hat? After dinner, Samuel turned on the computer and got ready to play a game. Bessy wrapped the blanket around her body, took out her mobile phone, and opened a game. I bought it randomly online. Samuel waited for the game to load and turned to look at Bessy, touching his ear studs subconsciously, as if assessing the credibility of her sentence. Once the game loaded, Samuel took the game characters to the arena. He suddenly remembered something and cancelled the match. Then turned to Bessy and raised an eyebrow.
Do you have an account? Shall we play together?
Episode 93. Familiarity. Samuel had seen Bessy playing games before, but most of them were duplicated materials, and he had never seen her play the arena before. Poker Tournament was an explosive PvP, player versus player, game. Other than the character backgrounds that already came with the game, players could also create their own character cards. PvP made use of the player's control of their character cards. Self-creation had been popular for a while, but not many people did it anymore because most of the self-created character cards were too weak.
What's your skill level? What position are you in?
Samuel played rather well, and even though he wasn't a professional player, his hand speed reached 300 and he was considered a master amongst the amateurs.
My skill level is about 2078 and I'm in the 9th level of the Guru class.
Samuel's hand was still on his mouse. Poker Tournament had seen 7 sections: Beginner Rookie, Intermediate Rookie, Advanced Rookie, Apprentice, Master, Guru, and Supreme. There were 9 levels in each class, and the class could only be upgraded once all 9 stars were achieved.
Poker Tournament didn't tolerate any faults and focused on the individual player's ability to match their cards to their skills. Most of the players in the game ranged from rookie to apprentice. As for the Masters class, the requirement for hand speed, awareness, and the overall view was too strict. Samuel's 9-star level in the Master class couldn't compare with the professional players, but among the amateur players, he could be regarded as an expert. Bessy shook her head. I'm not in the Guru class. Only players in the same class could play a match together. Samuel subconsciously thought that Bessy hadn't reached the Guru class yet, so he simply nodded. I've seen your hand speed before. It's probably around 200, which is much higher than the average person. Your rank should be in the Master class, which is also very powerful. Last time, Samuel had seen Bessy position herself in the game and had garnered a rough judgment of her hand speed. Of course, Samuel had forgotten that Bessy had still been injured at that time and hadn't used force. Mid-November, Saturday. The weather was getting colder. Bessy left class at noon and took the time to go to the bank, which was particularly crowded today. She glanced at all the people in the queue and turned to the VIP room to transfer a sum of money. When she came out, the manager still sent her out personally. After transferring the money, Bessy took a bus to the hospital to see Bertha. Grace and Andrea were already there. Andrea was helping Bertha pack her things.
Mom, why do you keep such an old thing?
Grace stood at the side and watched Andrea sort out the things in the bag one by one. When Grace had brought Bertha here, she had told Bertha that she didn't need to bring anything and she would arrange it for her. But Bertha had still brought a pile of old things. It looked so shabby that Grace was embarrassed to take it out in front of the nurse. Andrea laughed instead. Mom is nostalgic. There are a few things I've left for Bessy. Bertha coughed a few times, her breathing thin. And there are a few things to be divided between Anne and Pete. Grandma, there's no need. You should keep it for yourself. Susan heard Bertha and immediately stood up to speak. Pete sat on the other side with a cold expression, but his tone was gentle as he nodded coolly. Thank you, Grandma. Bertha nodded and didn't say much. Then I'll give what you don't want to your brother. Susan didn't care. At this time, Grace's phone rang. It was a video call from Anne. Grace enlarged Anne's beautiful face. Mom, did you see this? This is where I'll be performing. Anne turned sideways and showed a magnificent opera house behind her. Many celebrities have used this place before too. Grace nodded and said with a flushed face, The opera house in Evanston is indeed different. It's more stylish than ours in Chicago. Anne tried to take her phone as far as possible so that Grace and the others could look at the scene behind. Soon, someone from the Perez family beside Anne started asking her about the performance details, to which she answered one by one slowly. Her content was official and high-end. Susan leaned over and looked carefully at the phone screen. Grace tilted her phone and wanted to let Bessy take a closer look at it. She didn't even know just how beautiful the buildings and roads in Evanston were. She didn't look up and kept her head lowered while slicing an apple. Your grandma left something for you. Grace glanced at Bessy without speaking. She turned the camera directly to show Anne what Andrea had placed outside. Anne glanced at it through the lens. The things on the ground were a mess, and even though there weren't many, they looked very worn out after many years. Anne was uninterested and just smiled a little. Mom, there's no need. Just leave it for my cousins. After hanging up, Grace felt a lot better. She tilted her head and asked Pete with a smile, Do you want to go to Evanston like your second cousin next time? I don't know. I'll see where I can go with my results next time. Pete took another knife and put Bessy's sliced apples onto a plate. Susan, on the other hand, longed for it. Aunt, is Anne going to perform in that opera house? Only Susan liked to talk to her about such things, so Grace nodded. Yes, she's there to become an apprentice to a master. Anne has obtained a few minutes at the performance of her future master. After a few days, I'll give you the ticket. It didn't take long for the sky to darken and for the rain to fall. The rain was heavy. Andrea's family and Grace went home one after another. Bessy didn't bring an umbrella and originally wanted to try to walk in the rain, but the rain was too heavy and she was very cold. Her coat was soaked. The phone in her pocket rang. Bessy glanced at the rain and thought for a while. Then, she stopped walking and stood by the gate to answer the phone. After finishing a case, Marvin went out with Officer Gomez and drove away in Marvin's car. Samuel drove his car to the hospital for Michael.
Joshua, I've asked Officer Gomez. Bessy is related to him.
Samuel looked at Michael in the rearview mirror. Michael leaned against the door, his eyes dark as he pondered hard over something. Samuel felt strange and glanced over at him. Then he saw Bessy at the gate. She seemed to be talking to someone. He stared at his back view. It was a tall boy wearing a cap. He couldn't see the guy's face from this angle, but he could see his side profile under the cap. Samuel felt a sense of familiarity. Then he sat up straight on the driver's seat in agitation and almost went crazy.
That's...
Michael looked up when he heard his voice and asked in an undulated voice,
Do you know him?
The rain and mist were very heavy and seemed to form a veil around Bessy. Samuel nodded, then shook his head again. He opened the car and felt like his brain was going to explode.
I don't know, but he looks very similar to Toby Yearling.
Samuel got out of the car and trotted to the gate. Toby Yearling? Michael had never heard of this name before, so he just turned towards them. He put his hand on the window and knocked on it distractedly, his whole body leaning on the door and wrinkling his black shirt. It wasn't until the tall figure left that Michael looked away expressionlessly. At the hospital gate, when Samuel trotted to Bessy's side, the tall boy with the cap beside Bessy had already walked into the rain. Once closer, the face under the cap became clearer. Toby's appearance was very unique, and he was also a popular star in the entertainment industry. Samuel was sure that the person wearing the peaked cap was the sun god. Instantly, images of the sun god's famous battles flashed across his mind. He had emerged from the team OST 3 years ago. Over the past 3 years, OST had dominated various seasons that made the world go crazy. His ability and powerful talent had saved the entire team several times. It could be said that countless professional-level players and competitors all believed in Sun God. It was worth staying in the arena for a lifetime to play a battle against Sun God.
Bessy, do you know Toby Yearling?
Samuel couldn't catch up with him and stared at Bessy, stunned and about to go crazy. Bessy seemed to be deep in thought and only reacted at this moment. She turned her head slowly and asked, Who? She was frowning and seemed quite surprised.
Toby Yearling, the sun god, the one in Team OST,
Samuel said anxiously. If Michael wasn't sitting in the car not far away, he would have started shaking Bessy's shoulders.
Don't you even know Toby Yearling?
Bessy responded, then raised her head again, pointed in the direction of Toby and asked in a calm voice, The guy who just walked away? He's the sun god you're talking about? Fine. Samuel stared at Bessy in amazement. Her clothes were a little wet and her eyebrows were raised. Her eyes were dark and expressionless. Samuel completely admitted defeat. He was only now beginning to feel like Bessy really wasn't a fan of Toby Yearling, nor Team OST, and that she didn't even know Toby Yearling. Otherwise, how could she be so calm?
Ask the way? You're so lucky. Why didn't he come and ask me?
Samuel murmured, then turned back and stared at Toby Yearling's back for a long while before he turned to Bessy again.
Let's go. Joshua is also in the car.
Bessy didn't bring an umbrella and had wanted to call a cab, so Samuel had come at the right time. The two of them trotted into the car, wet. Samuel turned the temperature up higher. Michael took out a dark blanket from the back, handed it to Bessy and asked,
How's your grandma?
Bessy put on the blanket, and the precious fur was soaked with water. It was useless now. In the rearview mirror, Samuel saw this and looked away expressionlessly. She's neither good nor bad, but I don't know how long she can hold on for. Bessy leaned back, but the chill on her body seemed to be drilling into her bones. So she leaned her head and looked out the window of the car. Halfway through, Bessy realized that the car wasn't driving in the direction of the school. 20 minutes later, the car parked in front of a villa. The terrain was very good, and it was in the center of Chicago. Perhaps it was because of the rain, but the surroundings were quiet, and a small garden also came with the villa. As soon as the car stopped, the electronic gate of the villa opened on its own. Episode 94. The Clerk's Assistant. An old man in a gray robe came out holding 2 black umbrellas. He handed the black umbrella that wasn't opened to Samuel and then held the umbrella for Michael as he got out of the rear door.
Simons, let's go in first.
Samuel touched his arm.
It's so cold, I have to take a hot bath first.
Michael and Bessy had already walked forward.
Take a shower first, or it's easy to catch a cold.
Michael took her directly to a room upstairs.
Simons should have prepared a bathrobe and other stuff. They're all new, and I'll bring up a new change of clothes later.
Bessy nodded and glanced at the furnishings of the room. The color scheme was mainly white and was in the country style. It had been raining so much that her clothes were soaked. She threw the blanket on the shelf and walked into the bathroom. The phone in her pocket rang again. It was Officer Gomez. Bessy still wore her clothes, so she picked them up directly. She turned on the hands-free function, put the phone on the dressing table, adjusted the water temperature, and asked casually, "Officer Gomez?"
Miss Miller, there are some things here that may require your confirmation.
Officer Gomez's car stopped in front of the gate at Bright Bow High School, and he leaned on the driver's seat.
I'm outside Bright Bow High School.
I'm not at Bright Bow High School. Bessy tied her hair up. I'm at a villa in the city. When Officer Gomez had visited Samuel to discuss some matters, he had been to Michael's house before, so he knew where Bessy was referring to.
Okay, I'll go over.
Downstairs.
Simons, is there something coming from Evanston?
Michael came down the stairs at a slow pace. Simons came out of the kitchen and nodded slightly.
There was a bag of clothes in the warehouse in the morning. I'll go get it. No need.
Michael turned upstairs. He was frowning slightly. Simons was stunned.
Simons, don't be alarmed.
Samuel finished his shower quickly and came out. He put on a bathrobe carelessly and said,
Michael is very lenient towards our Bessy.
Simons smiled and asked,
The Miss Miller is your relative? No, she's a high school student in Chicago. She only recently transferred to Bright Bow High School.
Samuel poured himself a glass of water.
That's the town that Robert was sent to before.
Simons had naturally heard of the Soup family being sent away, so he was silent for a moment.
That's so far.
It's not just that, Samuel said slowly. He thought about it and then complained.
You know, she doesn't even know who Sun God is. Just how difficult has her life been? You want to bring her to Evanston next time?
Simons asked softly. Samuel chuckled.
If not...
Simons told the chef the menu for tonight before looking down and pondering for a moment. It was troublesome. This girl had no background, and he would have to spend the effort to get her there. She was already in high school, so he had to take the opportunity to teach her something before going to Evanston. There were many people in Evanston, and if she said or did something wrong, there would be a particularly great impact. It was a place packed with wolves, especially if she stood with the Clark family. After thinking for a while, Simons lowered his head, took out a small book in his pocket, and began to record something down. Upstairs, Michael took out a box and knocked on Bessy's door again, his voice low and slow.
Are you done? I'll put your clothes outside.
There were no female maids nor people of a similar age in this house, so he had brought the clothes over personally. Michael had wanted to put the clothes outside the door for her to retrieve later, but when he was about to put it down, the door opened from inside. Bessy had a bathrobe wrapped loosely around her, and the straps were also loose, making her appear even thinner. The bathrobe was probably a man's, and it was a little bigger on her body. Her silk-like neckline was revealed and was strikingly white. She took a towel and wrapped her hair. The movement showed a gorgeous tattoo on her shoulder faintly. Michael put down the box and politely took a step back.
The clothes are inside.
Okay, thank you. Bessy put down her towel and picked the box up. Michael looked away quietly. Bessy closed the door before opening the box. There were many clothes inside from this season, and they were all in her size. She randomly took a black sweater out and put it on. Outside, Samuel wore a bathrobe and held a cup of tea as he walked upstairs slowly. When he saw the scene in the room from afar, he leaned against the railing of the flower-shaped staircase and laughed.
Michael, you can't do this.
Samuel snorted at how he retreated almost sentimentally and courteously.
Michael, do you want me to teach you a few tricks?
Michael remained expressionless and took a few steps forward. He suddenly thought of something, paused, frowned, and seemed quite displeased.
Go into your room and change your clothes.
Change clothes? What kind? Samuel looked down at his bathrobe. This was what he usually wore in the villa.
He pays particular attention.
Samuel pulled up his bathrobe, thought about it, and went to his room to change into something else. Bessy changed her clothes and looked at her phone. Officer Gomez's message showed that he was arriving soon. After she finished drying her hair, she walked to the lobby on the first floor. Only then did Simons see the girl's appearance. He had seen a lot of famous ladies from rich families, and they had all been excellent in terms of appearance and temperament. But even so, Simons was amazed when he saw Bessy. She was different from all the ladies he had seen. Her eyebrows were lowered and her exquisiteness was still obvious. She looked so unbridled that he didn't dare to look at her straight in the eye, and her brow bone held a kind of casualness that young people had and couldn't be hidden. This was a young lady who couldn't be ignored in any situation. Simons thought it was normal to be attracted to such a girl.
Miss Miller, is there anything you want to drink?
Simons's voice was gentle, but his attitude was cautious and serious. Bessy was sitting on the sofa waiting for Officer Gomez's arrival. No need, thank you. Simons poured her a cup of tea that Michael often drank and asked,
Who else is there in your family?
My grandma. Bessy looked at her phone. Jared just sent her a message asking if she had considered it well. Simons asked her a few questions in succession. His image of Bessy was built up in the process. They didn't talk for long before Officer Gomez and Marvin entered.
Simons.
Marvin greeted him respectfully. Simons nodded and stood up, his attitude still respectful.
Mr. Gomez, I'll find Samuel. Please wait a moment.
Officer Gomez had been here before, so Simons knew that he was the captain of the criminal investigation team. Harvey, Samuel, and Marvin all respected Officer Gomez. Simons went upstairs to find Samuel. Officer Gomez didn't pay attention and brought a computer over to Bessy directly.
Look at this.
Bessy turned on the computer and saw an image stuck on the screen. Marvin and Harvey came over. Simons brought Samuel downstairs. When he saw a group of people around Bessy, he asked,
What are they doing? They're asking Bessy to help analyze some data. I guess it's quite tricky this time around.
Samuel frowned.
Isn't Miss Miller still a student?
Simons froze.
Yeah, but I heard her grandfather used to do this, so she taught herself computer programming.
Samuel kept walking downstairs. Simons paused and his pitch rose slightly in surprise.
Self-taught? Why didn't you let Alexander Clark come to Chicago instead? What if a high school student messes with this matter and does something wrong?
From Simons' perspective, Bessy was still a high school student. Officer Gomez and Marvin were now dealing with big cases, so it seemed a little too much for a high school student to participate in. Samuel raised an eyebrow and chuckled.
That's not the case. Bessy is very impressive. You don't have to worry.
He had asked Officer Gomez several times, but he still didn't reveal Bessy's identity and had only said a few words. He went downstairs. Simons followed Samuel in concern. He was still unconvinced and felt like Samuel was too indulgent to Bessy. She was just a high school student. How impressive could she be? It's almost done. Bessy pressed the enter button and tilted her head slightly while talking to Officer Gomez. I'll talk to the technician in your team later. Simons followed behind Samuel and heard Bessy's voice, as well as a few technical words. Officer Gomez and Marvin listened very carefully. Marvin saw that Bessy had put down the computer, so he stepped aside and brewed her another cup of tea. He then put it in front of her with a very respectful and polite attitude. Bessy typed on the computer with one hand and then took a sip of tea with the other. She thought for a moment, tilted her head and said in a soft voice, Marvin, go to the guest room upstairs and bring me the cell phone on the table. Marvin nodded and didn't hesitate at all.
Okay.
Then he turned and asked Simons where the guest room was before heading upstairs, respectful and courteous. Simons was still a little surprised. He also knew Marvin. He was a competent man whom Michael brought around with him. He had even been with Michael since he was young and only listened to him. The other members of the Clark family couldn't even give orders to the people around Michael, not even Joshua. But Marvin listened to Miss Miller's orders? Once Officer Gomez had left with Harvey, Simon suddenly realized that they had come not for Samuel, but Bessy specifically. Simons had a lot of doubts in his heart, but he couldn't figure anything out. He kept it inside. But his impatience was clawing at his heart like a cat's paw. Marvin didn't go out with Officer Gomez after finishing his work. Samuel picked up the computer and played a game. He thought of Toby Yearling and complained to Marvin about how Bessy didn't even know Toby Yearling.
Bessy, join the game. I'll carry you.
Samuel logged onto his account. Bessy leaned on the sofa, looked at her phone, and didn't raise her head. I don't have a Guru account. Michael just came downstairs. The air conditioning was turned on in the hall and it wasn't very cold, so he had taken off his windbreaker and was wearing a black shirt. The cuffs were rolled up to reveal his thin wrist.
I remembered.
Samuel glanced at Michael and touched his chin.
That guy does. He pointed to Michael and smiled. Then he lowered his head and said to Bessy, that account used to be Michael's wife. It has a bunch of the best cards and even rare internal cards. Even if he doesn't play now, nobody can borrow his account. But if you want to, he'll lend you. Bessy felt strange and slightly tilted her head. Michael plays games too?
Episode 95. Chloe's Introduction to the Students.
Of course, poker tournament was even more popular 3 years ago. He was the one who spent the most time on the game. The team OST even invited him before. If it weren't for... Samuel paused at this. Michael, what's your account?
Michael picked up a cup of tea and looked at Bessy with dark eyes.
You want to play?
Yeah. Bessy originally didn't want to play, but she was now curious because of what Samuel said. How high is your rank? In poker tournaments, there was a hidden point. If Michael had reached the guru class or a class above that, he could still play a match with Samuel, even if he dropped.
Supreme? I forgot, you can take a look.
Michael yawned and didn't seem to be in high spirits. He slowly reported a string of English letters and a password. Simons took out a piece of paper to help Bessy remember and went over to give it to her. But he found that Bessy's memory was very good and she had memorized it already. She clicked enter. Bessy saw that the words spelled out in English formed a few words. Lonely Hawk 001. Bessy's absent-minded hands paused. She didn't play much this time and just used her left hand slowly to control the card and follow behind Samuel. Every time Samuel was about to die, Bessy revived him with a bloody move or a life-saving move.
Bessy, your ability is quite good and your response is quick too.
If it had been done only once or twice, he would have attributed it to luck. But after several times, Samuel found that something wasn't right and turned to stare at Bessy, his voice regrettable.
But your hand speed is low. It would be nice if you could reach half of Chloe's hand speed.
Bessy glanced at him and said nothing. Monday. The long-awaited new student had finally arrived. Paul and the others looked through the window and saw Chloe following Mr. Scott. She wasn't wearing a school uniform and looked beautiful, unique, and slightly arrogant. Her pride was different from Kenneth's innate pride. It was also different from Bessy's unwillingness to participate in the world. It was aggressive and domineering. It made people slightly uncomfortable.
Chloe, you can sit with Riley.
Mr. Scott then asked Riley to move her table back. Riley was honest and had good relationships with people. Director Moore had told him that Chloe was from a big background, so Mr. Scott was still worried. Paul, Kenneth, and Bessy were already enough, but now there was another. Chloe, English class, was even more complicated. Riley only felt like Chloe's clothes were too exquisite. She was careful not to touch her and greeted Chloe. Chloe nodded and didn't speak. After class, the students from the other classes came over to see the new student. There were many such people by the English class's door.
I heard that it's Chloe, the one in Team OST.
Yeah, it's her. I recognized her face from the match last time. But it wasn't easy to get close to Chloe. She was arrogant and cold. Paul sat at the back and touched his chin with his hand. He stared at Chloe and felt a strange illusion. He kept feeling like Chloe was particularly similar to Bessy in one aspect. They were both especially hard to get close to. However, Bessy and Chloe's difference was like the difference between something genuine and pirated. Bessy's "don't bother me" aura was completely different from Chloe's "don't get too close to me" aura. He had been looking forward to her arrival the most, but now that she was here, he didn't want to get close to her. Thinking of this, Paul glanced at Bessy. She was lying on the table with a jacket over her head. Her isolated figure also looked very difficult to mess with.
Classmate Harper, how's Sun God like in real life?
The boy in front turned around and asked Chloe excitedly.
Is World Poker Tour very good? Have you been to the big building?
Chloe lowered her head and flipped through a book. It's so-so.
Then do you have tickets for Sun God's game?
The boy scratched his head. Chloe didn't refuse directly and just smiled lightly. I'll ask Toby Yearling at night if there are any tickets left.
Oh my God, she can contact Sun God directly. I'm so jealous.
The boys in the class exclaimed, and the girls also made a big fuss. Chloe wasn't surprised by this situation. The classmates had come to greet her as she expected. A classmate who was almost a celebrity had come, so there was sure to be an uproar in school. But 3 people in the class were quite different. Chloe had noticed them. One of them was a girl whom she had never seen before. She had her head hidden behind a book and had covered her head with her school jacket. The teacher didn't bother her even when she slept in class. Chloe frowned and thought that her grades were probably so bad that the teacher had given up on her. The other two people were Paul and Kenneth. She didn't notice Paul, but Kenneth. Chloe felt like his name was a little familiar. After school at night, Chloe kept her books and left. A boy stopped at the door of the classroom. He was prancing about and blushing. Chloe smiled subconsciously and asked, "You want my signature? Do you want me to write some blessings?" The boy was stunned for a moment, then he blushed even redder, looked across from her and stuttered, No, I'm looking for Bessy." Chloe was about to pick up the pen, but she paused quickly. She almost spurted. "You don't know me?" But she held back. "Bessy, the school has ended. A junior fan is here to ask for your signature." Paul walked over to Bessy's table and kicked her chair, but his movement wasn't rude. Bessy slowly got up from the table and took a sip of water from the thermos. She cleared her throat, then went over to sign the boy's name, very perfunctorily. Very, very perfunctorily. Chloe didn't see Bessy's face and only saw her back, but her attitude? She had fans too? The boy showed his thanks gratefully. "Thank you, Bessy." He held the piece of paper like it was a baby. Chloe frowned. Who was this girl? The next day, Paul and Kenneth came into class, but by the time they reached it, English class was in chaos. "What's the matter? Why is it so noisy?" Paul sat on a stool and saw Bessy lying on the table. She seemed quite annoyed, so he raised his voice. The noise in the class instantly halved. It was obvious that his prestige in English class was particularly high. "Paul," Wendy lowered her voice and said, full of excitement and agitation, "Chloe has 3 tickets with her." Paul paused and stood upright. 3? I saw it with my own eyes. It wasn't surprising that she had 3 tickets, since she was an insider. Paul didn't doubt it and went to his seat absent-mindedly. If there had been no tickets left, he would have given up and asked his father to pretend to be a staff member so he could go inside. But since there were still tickets left, Paul couldn't suppress it. He thought about it, pulled out a blank piece of paper and wrote a line on it to Chloe. But Chloe didn't write back. Wendy found an opportunity to speak to Paul. "Chloe is very cold and doesn't look at notes. There are too many people writing notes to her every day." Other than Bessy, Paul had never seen any girl behave like this to him. He leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Fine." At noon, during lunch, Paul pulled Kenneth along and went to find Chloe. He smiled and asked, "Student Harper, do you know where the cafeteria is? Shall I bring you there?" Chloe glanced at him, but didn't refuse. She even thanked him lightly. For 3 days in a row, Paul called Chloe along for lunch. "Don't you have another friend too? Why don't you ask her?" Chloe glanced at Kenneth and asked. Paul waved his hand. "You don't have to bother about her. She won't come with us." Chloe nodded thoughtfully and didn't speak. After the midterm exam, Bessy didn't go into the cafeteria to eat, and Paul knew that she went to the school doctor's office. At the school's medical office, Bessy slowly walked inside with her phone. Samuel was sitting outside and he frowned. "Bessy, are you okay?" It seemed like Bessy had been like this ever since she left the villa, low in spirits. Bessy wasn't bothered. She just leaned back on the chair and took out her phone easily. "I'm okay." "Are you going to OST's game the day after tomorrow?" Samuel spun a pen in his hands and smiled. Bessy murmured, "I'm still thinking about it." "What?" Samuel didn't understand. "Nothing." Bessy opened the game and casually said, "Have you found the ticket for the meeting?" Bessy remembered this matter. Samuel sighed. "Do you think it's so easy to get the World Poker Tour's ticket?" "Oh, you've probably never heard of the World Poker Tour." Bessy glanced at him. Michael called her from inside. Bessy handed her phone to Samuel. "Help me play one round." Samuel quickly took her phone and took over the game. It was the mobile version of Poker Tournament. After playing, Samuel glanced at the game page and realized that Bessy's account was 1 district. It was an insider account like Michael's? Samuel was a little surprised. He was still thinking about it when Bessy's phone suddenly rang. It was a Twitter video call. "Bessy, you have a video call," Samuel yelled. He looked down and saw one word on the screen. Yearling. It was succinct. Samuel stared at the screen for a while, but decided that it was rude to invade someone else's privacy. When Bessy came out, he curiously asked, "Bessy, your friend." Having known Bessy for so long, Samuel knew her pretty well. It wasn't easy to be considered her friend. Bessy casually took the cell phone and glanced at it. Her expression didn't change much. You could say so. She went outside to receive the call. Seeing how calm she looked, Samuel did not ask more. That person probably wasn't anyone important. Samuel went back to his seat and went through the group chat. Robert wrote, "Nothing to live for. JPEG." Robert wrote again, "Michael, say something." Samuel knew right away that Robert had met with some obstacles yet again while looking for Daniel. He chuckled.
"Michael, Robert is looking for you."
Michael was fiddling with the anatomy model when he heard this. He didn't even look up as he asked,
"Daniel?"
"Bingo."
Michael put the scalpel aside and coughed softly. "There's no point in looking for me. I'm just a doctor. What can I help him with?"
Samuel was speechless. Michael was quietly observing the anatomy model, ignoring Samuel. His cell phone rang and he picked it up.
"Dad, the old man's birthday party is at the end of the month. Will you be coming back?"
Michael leaned against the edge of the table.
"I'll see how when the time comes."
Joshua never really had many expectations or demands of his youngest son.
"All right."
Capital. He hung up the call. A few middle-aged men in the room couldn't help but say to Joshua,
"Dad, aren't you too indulgent towards Michael? It's been so many years. Look at his guts now. He doesn't stay in the military team. He left the research institute after just 2 weeks, and the money we gave him to start his business would have been gone if not for our sister's management. Young people are fickle like this. It's normal."
Joshua was standing before the bookshelf. The middle-aged man opened his mouth and turned towards Joshua. This old man had been strict for the greater part of his life, but when it came to this son of his, he was completely indulgent. Who in the capital didn't know Michael? He was somebody that nobody wanted to offend. He was more prominent than anyone in the Clark family. At the same time, at the Smith family's house,
"Chloe, what's it like in your new environment with new classmates?"
David asked. Chloe took a bite of her food and casually said, "It's all right, just that the students of Brightbow High School like to make a fuss out of nothing." They had asked her about the OST internal news or the World Poker Tour as if they'd never been exposed to the outside world.
"You're a little celebrity. Isn't it normal that they're asking you things like these?"
David smiled.
"How could that small place be compared to the capital?"
The greatest leader they'd ever seen was Mr. Grant on the news. Grace sat on the other side for this meal. She wanted to know why Chloe was considered a little celebrity, but did not ask.
"You're in homeroom, right? I remember Bessy's there too. Have you met?"
Thomas was holding his fork as he asked, "Who's Bessy?" Chloe looked up. Episode 96. A Mess in the Classroom.
"Bessy is Anne's sister. She's in the homeroom,"
David explained. Chloe had heard of Anne, but no one in the Smith family had mentioned Bessy before. Only now that David had explained did she know that Bessy was associated with the Smiths. Bessy left a rather deep impression on her, but she couldn't see how Grace and Bessy were associated at all. "I've heard of her, but we've never talked," Chloe said. After dinner, Aunt Ruth went upstairs to give Chloe some milk. "Aunt Ruth, why haven't I seen Bessy in the Smith family before? Isn't she Anne's sister?" Chloe received the milk and asked.
"She doesn't live here."
Aunt Ruth furrowed her brows, evidently unwilling to say much about this. She was wondering who that cool and distant girl was, but as it turned out, she was just Anne's sister, a girl who was barely a stepdaughter in the Smith family. Chloe nodded in understanding and did not ask more when she saw Aunt Ruth's attitude. Aunt Ruth went downstairs. She saw Grace, who was in a daze with her cell phone in her hand.
"Aunt Ruth."
Grace kept her cell phone.
"Miss Harper is a member of Team OST and a professional gamer in poker tournament with more than 1 million fans on Twitter. She's very famous online,"
Aunt Ruth said slowly. Grace did not know what Team OST was, but when she heard about her being a gamer, she didn't think much about it. And yet, the fact that she had more than 1 million fans caught her attention. Grace widened her eyes.
"More than 1 million?
That many?" Aunt Ruth looked at Grace's expression and knew right away that she despised gamers. She smiled.
"Madame, you may not know this, but Team OST belongs to the World Poker Tour. Every member is a part of them."
Grace simply smiled when she heard her mention the World Poker Tour again. She did not know what else to say. But she knew that no matter how well she did in the industry, she would only reach the tip of the iceberg. She took her cell phone out and gave Anne a call. Friday. Bessy arrived early and rested her head on her desk. A group of people was huddled around Chloe's desk again.
I've seen Chloe's Twitter account. She's got more than 1 million fans.
The boy sitting in front of Bessy showed 2 other classmates his cell phone screen. He turned around to see ahead. It was Bessy on the desk. Her jacket was under her arms and she seemed to be sleeping. Although she was slumped over her desk, it still wasn't a good idea to provoke her. Mary looked at the boy and whispered, "Don't disturb her."
This Chloe is rich. Just her watch costs about $150,000.
Another boy whispered to Mary and the few of them.
I finally got through around under her guidance. She's good at gaming. She's pretty. Her family is rich. She's a winner at life.
The other classmates enjoyed watching Chloe play. She was fast and accurate and extremely good at giving instructions. She was helping people play on their accounts, and they often recorded the screen as she played. The second lesson of the morning ended, and there was a 20-minute break. Paul walked over to Bessy as he saw her get up. He placed his chin on her desk and said,
Bessy, Chloe has tickets. Do you want to go and watch the exhibition match with us tomorrow?
Bessy took out a book, flipped a page, and said, "No, I'm not going." Wendy suddenly yelled from behind Paul, and it sounded like he was playing a game. I'm dead. I'm dying. I can't lose this round." How noisy. Bessy remembered him. When Mrs. Lewis rejected her entry at the door last time, he was the first one to leave the classroom with Paul. "Hand it over." Bessy leaned on the wall and asked Wendy for the cell phone.
Bessy, what are you doing?
Wendy glanced up at Bessy when he had the time. Bessy looked at his cell phone screen. "Helping you pass the level."
No, Bessy, don't kid with me. I think I'll go to Miss Harper, Wendy hurriedly said. Bessy, don't disturb me, please. It's a crucial moment now. One more attack and I'm gone.
Wendy turned away to look for Chloe. Bessy rubbed her nose and went on to read her book. In the afternoon after lunch, during the self-revision period, Bessy usually didn't go to the classroom during afternoon self-revision periods. The homeroom knew that. When Chloe got back after lunch, she reached for her bag to get the entrance tickets. A group of them huddled around her.
Chloe, let me have a ticket too.
Chloe unzipped her bag and reached inside. She couldn't feel any tickets. Chloe's calm expression changed as she unloaded her bag's contents onto the table. There were a lot of expensive lipsticks, but not a single entrance ticket could be seen. Everyone just exchanged glances. Chloe clenched her fist as her expression stiffened. Who was the first to reach the classroom after lunch? They weren't sure how to react.
Chloe?
Chloe had lost all the tickets. A student committee member and I came up first. None of us touched it. Chloe suddenly thought of something. She strode towards Bessy's desk. Having been in this class for so long, she knew that Bessy was always the last to leave. Her expression went cold as she pushed Bessy's desk to its side. Bam! The textbooks, novels, and other materials were sprawled all over the ground. Everyone in the class went quiet. Riley hurriedly said, "Don't touch Bessy's things, she wouldn't." Chloe didn't say anything. She couldn't even be bothered to use her hands as she kicked the stack of things. It was a light kick, but an entrance ticket fell out of a novel. Chloe looked at the ticket that fell out of the book but did not reach out to get it. She simply turned to the rest and sneered sarcastically. Bessy hardly revised in the classroom in the afternoon. Mary arrived earlier than Bessy did and was shocked when she saw the mess. Her desk had been pushed aside. Bessy's desk was on the floor on its side and a pile of books was sprawled all over the ground in a mess. What happened to Bessy's desk? Mary squatted down and began picking up the books. She narrowed her eyes at a few people. Were you guys fighting?
No, why would we be fighting at her seat?
The boy in front cowered back and said,
You better tidy up Bessy's things. We dare not touch them.
Bessy usually appeared careless and casual, and no one in the class had ever seen her lose her temper. But she was considered a big boss that no one could afford to offend. Even Brian considered himself her underling. Nobody in the whole of Brightbow High School dared to offend her. Mary was picking up the books, but upon hearing what the boy said, she put them down slowly. She stood up and scanned the homeroom. Most of them were already there. Only a few obvious people were missing. Paul, Kenneth, Bessy, and the new student, Chloe. Tell me, what exactly happened here? Mary moved her desk back to where it originally was and calmly asked. A few of them exchanged glances, eventually stammering about what Chloe did.
Keep Bessy's things first, otherwise she'd be angry when she comes back.
The boy in front said again. By then, it'd be a major eruption. Mary's expression went a little cold as she said, I won't. Everyone's heart sank. If you don't have the guts to face Bessy, why didn't you guys stop her when it happened? Mary looked at the books and saw that there was a faint footprint on one of her favorite books. She smiled and her eyes went cold. Leave the books here. Nobody touches it. Everyone in the homeroom kept quiet. The atmosphere was oddly tense. On the other side, Paul and Kenneth were still eating outside. They were particular when it came to food. Team OST's exhibition match was the next day. Paul decided to have a steamboat lunch as a form of celebration. He'd planned to call Chloe along, but the food wasn't quite to her liking. The steamboat pot was filled with spicy soup. Paul had just one mouthful of meat and was already looking for water. Meanwhile, his cell phone rang. He only noticed it when an attendant reminded him. He placed more food into the pot while answering the call.
Wendy, what is it?
He sounded like he was enjoying himself. Wendy, on the other hand, sounded tense.
Paul, it's terrible. Our class is about to erupt. Erupt? What? Make yourself clear.
Paul was scooping some food for himself.
Chloe pushed Bessy's desk.
Wendy took a deep breath and said seriously. Paul paused.
What happened? Tell me slowly.
Chloe lost the entrance tickets and found them in Bessy's book. Come back before something happens in class. Paul put down his fork and spoon and wiped his mouth with a napkin.
I'm coming.
Kenneth narrowed his eyes when he overheard the conversation across from him. Paul and Kenneth got back very quickly. When he went into the classroom, it was oddly quiet. Bessy and Chloe were not there. Only Mary was in her seat working on some practice questions. Paul recognized that practice booklet. Bessy had given it to Mary. Paul looked at the books all over the floor as well as the few lollipops. He went straight to her desk and wanted to tidy up the books.
Mary, why didn't you pick up Bessy's books?
Before he even picked the first one up, Mary stopped him. Paul, you better not touch them. She sounded calm as usual. Bessy has a very good memory. She knows exactly how she arranged her books before she left. Even if you tidy them up, she'd know that somebody touched it. Mary put her pen down.
Damn.
Paul kicked the desk in front of him. Bam. The other people in the class dared not look up. Mary was rather expressionless. Paul gave Chloe a call. She rejected it the first time and only picked it up when he called again. You saw that ticket? Chloe sounded mocking. Paul scanned the floor and saw a ticket peeking out of the book.
You're too rash. Bessy wouldn't do something like this.
Paul's voice was deep.
She wouldn't? Then what would my ticket be doing inside her book?
Chloe was sitting in the cafeteria as she sneered. She was the last to leave the classroom. Who else could it be if not her? Chloe leaned back in her seat as she stirred her coffee. Her smile was mocking. So, Paul, what is this call for, to defend her? Chloe couldn't think of anyone who'd have taken it. It seemed like something Bessy would do anyway.
It's better to thrash things out in person. I'm not defending her, but I trust her character. Come back first and I'll help you get to the bottom of this.
Paul took a huge breath. How are you going to do that? The ticket in her book is the best explanation. Surely you can't be saying that that ticket is hers? Chloe found this amusing. Paul, would you even believe it? It was indeed hard to explain what they'd seen. Paul squatted down and looked at that ticket. He then looked at all of the books on the ground and got a headache.
Anyone informed Bessy yet?
Paul scanned the classroom. They all shook their heads. Who would dare break the news to her? It was courting death. Paul inhaled and took out his cell phone. Episode 97. Bessy's Revenge. At this point, Bessy was practicing some penmanship in the school doctor's office. She was holding a pen in her left hand, doing it stroke by stroke.
Bessy, a person's handwriting shows their character. Do it properly. Don't waste the efforts of Michael, who'd got it custom made for you.
Samuel hurriedly said when he saw that Bessy was about to give up.
Do you know who this is?
Samuel was trying to be all mysterious. Bessy was leaning her head on the table.
Who?
She sounded disinterested.
Ray Soup, Mr. Soup. His calligraphy is very valued. Do you know how many collectors are willing to fork out tons of money for it? But too bad he moved away and not many people managed to contact him anymore.
Samuel said and sighed. Oh, Bessy wasn't familiar with the name Ray Soup, so there wasn't much interest in him too.
You're going to be killed in the capital if you go on like this.
He sighed again as he looked at Bessy's unchanging expression. Ray Soup was very well known in the capital. Few people could engage with him. And yet, he specially came up with a penmanship book for Bessy to practice with. On that note, Samuel went to look in the storage box. He realized that there were a few more copies of Mr. Soup's original works. The monetary value of this aside, it was difficult enough having to get Mr. Soup to agree to such a request. Seeing Bessy practice, Samuel couldn't help but think, if it was Joshua who approached Mr. Soup instead, would he have managed to do this? It seems unlikely. Samuel turned towards Bessy again and thought, do you know how many dollars he had to fork out for this? The high society in the capital knew that the Clark family was rich, but Samuel never thought that Michael would be that rich. No wonder so many people hated the wealthy. Samuel was a little envious of himself. Bessy was getting frustrated with the practice. It required a lot of patience to practice penmanship, and patience had never been Bessy's strong suit. When Paul called, her tone was rather impatient. Speak. It was cold and unhurried. Just a single word was enough to push Paul to speak. Paul paused for a while before cautiously saying, something happened in the classroom. Bessy, are you free now to come over for a moment? Paul had the guts to say this even after she used such a tone on him. Bessy figured that she had to go up for a moment. She tossed the pen onto the table and said, I have to go back to the classroom for a while. Samuel was startled when Bessy threw the pen like that. That was Michael's pen. Anything regarding Michael, even his nail clipper, was probably expensive goods. Bessy casually wore a baseball cap as she walked towards the homeroom. The homeroom was very quiet to begin with, but it became even quieter after Paul made the call. The back door was opened slowly. The class had been very disciplined lately, and there was a pin-drop silence. Bessy walked in, slightly confused. Kenneth glanced up at her. Paul and Wendy were standing close to Mary. Bessy walked further in before she saw the scene around Mary. Her books were all over the ground, and a few of them had footprints on them. Some pages were even torn from the impact as they were already worn out in the first place. Bessy removed her baseball cap. The atmosphere tensed up in the classroom, as if any movement would cause an enormous balloon to burst. Most of them just kept their eyes on the book. Paul opened his mouth but had no idea what to say. Just as everyone was reaching the peak of their nervousness, someone chuckled, but with much unhappiness. Paul and the rest turned to look at Bessy. Her eyes were slightly red. Even her smile seemed threatening. Mary, tell me. Bessy leaned towards her and spoke calmly. Mary closed her book and told her everything she knew. Bessy, Paul coughed and said, don't worry, we'll settle this for you. Paul was the youngest of the Addams family. Everyone in school knew that. It was easy for him to get this settled. No need. Bessy rejected easily. She made a call and asked, do you have 20 people on your side? They couldn't hear what the response was on the other end. Bessy nodded and hung up. She didn't say much, and nor did she pick up her books. She just stood aside with her cell phone spinning in her hand. In less than 5 minutes, Brian came up. Everyone in the homeroom had heard of Brian and was even tenser now. Brian glanced at Bessy's desk and said, wow, the guts. This one. Bessy raised her chin and pointed at Chloe's seat. Brian did not say anything as he moved Chloe's desk to the hallway. The homeroom students still weren't sure what Bessy was planning to do. Paul glanced at Brian and was worried that Bessy would do something that alerted the school. He followed closely behind Bessy. Bessy, what are you doing? The rest of them slowly followed behind too. They went out and saw Bessy in the hallway, calm and composed as usual. She was slowly throwing Chloe's books down from the 5th floor, one by one. For them to not hit anyone, she got 20 people to clear out an area for that. It was a domineering act. Doing such a thing on the school campus in broad daylight. This was the first time the students saw something like this. The other students avoided the 20 people surrounding the area. No one dared to get close. Bessy did not lose her temper as she did it slowly. But everyone felt oddly intimidated as their hair stood on end. Bessy had been in Brightbow High School for more than 2 months, and most of the homeroom students didn't approach her. But they never expected her to dare to do something like this. They turned towards Brian. How could they forget about this ferocious, renowned name in the estate? Although Brian had mellowed out a little ever since he entered Brightbow High School, Paul had never dared offend Brian. How simple could Bessy be if she managed to get Brian to listen to her just like that? It had been raining the past few days and the ground downstairs was a little damp. The garden nearby had just been dug up, so there was mud in the rainwater as well. Some of the books fell right into the mud. Bessy looked down at the books and then turned towards Brian. Brian smiled but did not say a thing. He then picked up Chloe's desk and tossed it down too. Bam! Everyone felt it in their hearts. From the moment Bessy began tossing the books down, everyone from the 1st floor to the 6th had come out of their classrooms to check out what was happening. The 20 people downstairs were those who weren't to be offended too. It was the 9th grade's afternoon self-revision period. Every floor was initially quiet, but they were getting rather excited and noisy now. Except the 5th floor. After tossing all of Chloe's things down, Bessy went back to the classroom. The other students followed behind her, completely quiet. They were stunned. They'd thought that the misunderstanding just had to be explained, and with Paul's mediation, things would be fine. Who knew that Bessy wouldn't even give them such a chance? Mary took the time to rearrange her desk, placing the damaged books on one side and the intact ones on the other. She also wiped the footprints off with a damp tissue. Bessy went back to her seat and flipped the few damaged books. A few of the books were already ripped at the spine. Meanwhile, Mary was wiping one of the reference books. Michael had gotten someone to bring the reference books over from the Capitol.
Bessy, I've already got someone to settle the surveillance cameras in the hallway,
Paul said as he followed her in. Bessy hadn't said a word from the moment she threw Chloe's books down. It was rather terrifying. Paul regretted going to eat his food that day. Bessy wasn't listening to him. She simply flipped through some of her books. Mary placed the ticket back into the book it came from. Although Mary had already wiped them once, Bessy was still able to see some traces of footprints. A few of the books also had bumps on the cover due to the impact. Although Bessy wasn't interested in the ticket, Samuel had painfully given it to her. That was why she placed it in her favorite book. Now that it had been stepped on by someone, she wasn't willing to pick it up because of how dirty it was. Bessy took the ticket out. She didn't say anything. Some people from the other classes were already coming to the homeroom to have a look. Students were just like this. It was boring to be studying so much in 9th grade. Such things would pique their interest. It was getting more bustling in the hallway. Brian hadn't left the hallway. Seeing this, he was getting ready to chase them back to class. Bessy walked out. Her gaze landed on the group of people standing around and she kicked the door. "Shut up!" It went silent in less than a second. Bessy turned back to the classroom. There was an empty spot beside Riley's desk. "You," Bessy said as she pointed at Riley's previous deskmate. "Move over here." The girl was so shocked, she had no idea why she was involved now. Paul turned around.
"What are you waiting for? Didn't you hear that?"
He then moved towards her and shifted her desk to where Riley was. That was initially Chloe's seat, but it was now taken over by the girl. They shifted the seats around such that it was arranged in the way before Chloe ever came to the class. Only then did Bessy return to her seat. Meanwhile, everyone in the hallway kept quiet the moment they saw Brian. Brian was different from Paul. Paul was just a boy from a rich family. Brian, on the other hand, had seen real blood. He could be brutal and cruel. The Brightbow High School students would rather offend 10 Pauls than in a single Brian. Hence, they quietly slipped back into their classrooms the moment Bessy went back in. When other classmates asked them what was going on, they simply waved them away and quietly said, "I can't tell you." Nobody dared to pick up Chloe's books that were thrown down the 5th floor. Even when the cleaning attendant wanted to clear it, someone else had pulled her away. Who in Brightbow High School did not know Brian? Anyone who dared touch those things in front of him was courting death. Bessy was back in her seat. She placed the ticket back into the book. She was going to send a message when she saw an unread message on her cell phone. It was from Samuel. "Are you all right?" He felt that Bessy's expression was a little strange when she left the school doctor's office, but she'd disappeared before he managed to ask her about it. So he sent a message instead. Bessy looked at the message for a while. She was a little frustrated. After a while, she sent a short reply. "I'm all right." In the school doctor's office, Samuel showed Michael the reply for his analysis. After moving the desk, Paul sat in front of Bessy again. "Sis." "I don't know. Don't bother me." Bessy placed her cell phone under the desk and rested her head on it. She was frustrated. Paul rubbed his nose and went back to his seat, asking Wendy, "Why did no one stop her just now?" "I didn't manage to, not at all," Wendy went on. "Chloe was simply too fast." Paul turned to the rest of them. Another person quietly said, "I dared not." It was Chloe. Not only was her family from the Capitol, but she was also an OST member, a part of the World Poker Tour. Paul dared to offend her, but what about the other ordinary students? Mary had just wiped Bessy's desk and seat as well. The cloth in her hand was now gray. She looked at Bessy lying on the desk and went to the washroom to rinse the cloth first. Riley saw that Mary left and followed behind. In the washroom, Riley was finally relieved. She stood beside Mary, who was rinsing the cloth, and whispered, "Mary, you're pretty cool today." Mary looked at her. "Am I?"
Didn't you see that you managed to shut Paul up? Mary looked down and smiled, a little abashedly. I was just so mad and anxious just now. Usually she'd never talk to Paul that way. But it's all right to let things blow up like this? Riley asked in concern. That's Chloe. Don't you think Bessy has offended her too much? Mary calmly said. There's Paul here. Furthermore, she's too much. She makes it seem as if we've never heard of the capital. Does she think she's a princess? She was way too spoiled and arrogant. Riley turned on the tap and washed her hands. But we don't know what it's like in the capital. And what's with the ticket in Bessy's book? Riley turned to Mary. Why would Bessy have it? The weird thing was that Bessy had a ticket to the exhibition match. The ticket was extremely hard to get a hold of, and Bessy wasn't even an OST fan. Riley couldn't figure out where Bessy could have gotten it from. Mary looked at her, not knowing how to explain this. Were these people suffering from memory loss? Had they forgotten that Bessy managed to get Noah Hyber's entire album? The set was so complete. Surely that was harder to get a hold of than a single ticket. Episode 98, A Stack of Tickets. The 9th grade building was pretty much the most important in the school. With such a commotion, only a few teachers were alerted to it. There were a lot of textbooks and reading materials for 9th grade students. It wasn't any good that Chloe's books were thrown all over. But when the teachers heard that it was Brian behind it, no one dared to come forward to clean up the mess. They couldn't mess with Brian, but they could talk with Bessy. But they didn't want to affect Bessy too, so they eventually went to look for Director Moore. Compared to them, Director Moore, who had the principal's backing, was in a better position to deal with Brian. Director Moore was all ready to deal with this until he heard that the mastermind was Bessy. This girl wasn't simple, especially after the case with Mrs. Lewis the last time. Director Moore found that the principal seemed to know this girl. He kept silent for a while before saying, "Don't do anything about this first. Let me talk to the principal." A few teachers exchanged glances. They didn't expect that it would have to involve the principal eventually. After leaving Director Moore's office, they felt that they'd made the right decision to look for him first before getting involved with it themselves. It seemed like even Director Moore himself was hesitant about this. Director Moore gave Principal White a call. "You said Bessy threw Chloe's books down and even told everyone not to pick them up." Principal White placed his cup of tea down. Director Moore confirmed it. "Then she surely wants Chloe to see it. She isn't an unreasonable, crazy girl. Chloe must have offended her in some way." Principal White found it weird. He smiled and said, "Don't worry about it. Leave it be for now. Let the books lie around there for the next 2 days before getting someone to clean it up." Director Moore was stunned. 2 days? Principal White said. "I haven't seen her like this in so long." Director Moore felt like he heard a hint of nostalgia in Principal White's voice. Nobody in the school cared about the pile of books. Chloe's books lay there in the mud, being blown by the breeze. Her desk landed in the mud too. On the other side, Chloe's limited edition bag was also soaked. Chloe was sitting in the cafeteria. She only decided to go back when it was time for the 3rd period to begin. When she walked to the 9th grade building, she saw the mess lying on the 1st floor. The limited edition bag in the mud caught her attention. Her expression changed as she rushed up to see the bag. There was a newly bought lipstick inside. Chloe couldn't believe it as she picked up one of the books beside her. She flipped open the first page and saw her name. As if someone caught wind of it, a few 9th grade students began peeking their heads out to see what was going on downstairs. Chloe's face had gone pale. Some books had been thrown around without care and a damaged desk as well. She wouldn't have guessed that it was all hers. Chloe's things were so openly destroyed by someone, being thrown down from the 5th floor. It was as if someone was stepping all over her. The same way she'd stepped all over Bessy's books and desk that afternoon. Chloe didn't need to think hard to guess who it was. Her expression darkened as she fumed and made a call to David. "Uncle, that stepdaughter of yours stole my ticket and didn't even say a thing. Had she returned it to me, I didn't even think of letting the school know about it. But she felt so guilty about it that she threw my desk down from the 5th floor. Ask that wife of yours, is this how she taught her daughter?" Upon hearing Chloe's words, David put his documents down and paused for a moment. He took a while to realize that it was Bessy that she was referring to. "What ticket? What exactly happened?" David stood up. "The tickets to the exhibition match." Chloe was almost mocking in her tone. David paused before answering.
I got it. Where's Mr. Scott? I'm coming over to the school now.
He hung up and tossed his pile of documents aside. Chairman Smith. The assistant hurriedly came over as she saw him stand up.
Put my schedule on hold.
David frowned. He then gave Grace a call, but she did not pick up. David furrowed his brows.
Give Aunt Ruth a call. Ask her where Grace went.
David grabbed his coat and went out. He had no idea if Bessy would even listen to Grace. Aunt Ruth replied very promptly. Grace was at the spa. David did not go straight to school. He went over to the spa to get Grace first. When he arrived, Grace was having her eyes closed as someone gave her a facial massage. Her bag was left in another room, so she hadn't heard it ring. Grace was shocked when she saw David and got the masseuse to stop for a moment.
What are you doing here?
Her heart sank. David's expression wasn't too pleasant.
Let's go to the school first. Your daughter had a conflict with Chloe.
David calmly said. Anne was in the capital now. Only Bessy was in Chicago and in the same class as Chloe. Grace felt her heart skip a beat. She didn't even have time to grab her jacket as she got up immediately.
What happened?
Why would she have a conflict with Chloe? Grace knew how David had been treating Chloe.
I'm not sure yet. Let's go to school first.
David turned around and exited the spa. Grace grabbed her bag and walked out while giving Bessy a call. It hung up on the second tone. She did not want to pick it up. Over at Bright Bow High School, Chloe took a huge breath and looked at the terrible mess of books. She went up to the homeroom without picking them up. When she arrived there, she realized that her original seat had been filled. This couldn't have been Mr. Scott's doing. He had just arranged for her to sit where she was sitting. Why would he make changes for no reason? Besides Paul, she couldn't think of anyone who would do this. Her fingers trembled with anger. She walked into class and headed for Paul right away without even glancing at Bessy. Paul, what's the meaning of this? How could he allow Bessy to just throw her belongings off the building?
It doesn't mean anything.
Paul leaned back in his seat.
You threw someone's books and someone did the same to you. It makes sense.
The other people in the class kept their heads low. Chloe looked around and sneered. Fine. She turned away and walked out of the class. She went to look for Mr. Scott at his on-campus residence right away. Mr. Scott was the head of the mathematics department. He was spending his time preparing lesson notes. With Director Moore and the principal involved, the other teachers in the school dared not to poke their noses into this business. Meanwhile, the homeroom students did not inform Mr. Scott about it either. Initially, it was because they hadn't expected things to blow up like that. Then, it was because Brian was now involved and everyone did not want to create more trouble. Only when Chloe went to look for Mr. Scott did he learn about this. He did not say much. He simply got Chloe to take a seat first as they waited for David's arrival. Bessy had been resting on the desk the whole time. She only got up during fourth lesson. Holding the few damaged books in her hands, she walked towards the school doctor's office. Everyone around her kept quiet. Paul furrowed his brows and asked Wendy,
Ask Director Moore whether they've gotten a hold of the surveillance camera footage.
The most important thing now was to find out the truth. Otherwise, the conflict would only get bigger. Bessy arrived at the school doctor's office. Samuel was leaning back in his chair when he saw Bessy arrive with a book.
You're reading tonight? Not practicing your penmanship anymore?
I am. Bessy looked at the practice sheets on the table. Michael looked up as he heard her come in. He saw her expression and paused, but did not say a thing. Marvin had not arrived with the food, so Bessy sat there and began practicing. Her expression eased as she wrote. The cell phone she placed on the table rang. She held it up in frustration. Just as Michael thought that she might hurl the cell phone to the ground, her expression mellowed down. I'm going out to get something. She did not pick up the phone as she told Samuel and Michael that. Michael nodded.
Go on.
Michael waited for Bessy to leave with her cell phone. He then came out and leaned against the table Bessy was sitting at as he flipped through her books. These were the books he'd picked out for her. They were very new, and Michael knew that this girl wasn't interested in much. But she treasured such books a lot. But he could see that these books were damaged in some way. Why were there footprints on these brand new books? Michael paused and narrowed his eyes. Bessy walked out and saw the black van. She walked towards it, and the back of the van was opened. There were only two people inside, a chauffeur and a young man in a baseball cap. Ever since Bessy got into the back seat, the chauffeur had been trying to size her up. But she was looking downwards, and he couldn't see her whole face in the rearview mirror. Her features looked nice, but she appeared rather impatient. Where are the things I asked you for a few days back? Bessy leaned back. The man sitting by the window tipped his chin up and placed a stack of tickets in Bessy's hands.
You're coming to watch our exhibition match tomorrow?
He tilted his head and asked her. His voice was clear and even sounded rather serious. If someone else was here, they might be screaming. Even though only half his face was visible, those hardcore fans would surely recognize that this was the king of the World Poker Tournament. Toby. I don't know, I'll see. I'm asking for these for my friends. Bessy didn't look at how many he'd given her, but it was a rather thick stack. She'd received it and placed it in her pocket. All right, I'll be off then. On one of the nights she'd spent in the school doctor's office, she'd video called Toby, asking for the tickets. Toby nodded and watched her leave. Only after she was completely out of sight did he turn away. He took his left hand out of his pocket. It had been clenched the whole time, and now he realized he'd been sweating. The man sitting in the driver's seat was the OST team's current coach. He looked at Bessy leave and a thought came to his mind. He suddenly had a memory of a picture he saw when he met the older OST members. He turned around and looked at Toby.
Sun God, just now. Don't you find that girl looks like...
Toby did not respond as he was reminded.
Coach, we've got to go. There's a training session at 7.
The coach nodded, but he couldn't help but look towards the school gate one last time. When Chloe called David, it was already during the third period in the afternoon. By the time he picked up Grace and arrived at the school, it was already 10 minutes past dismissal time. Grace understood what happened from David's assistant. She couldn't believe it.
She took your ticket? Why?
Bessy was disobedient, but from what Grace knew about her, she wouldn't do this. It wasn't taking my ticket, it was stealing. The ticket is still with Bessy, that's the evidence. Chloe corrected Grace with a mocking tone. As to why she did it, you've got to ask her. I don't want to bring this to the police station, but I can't take this lying down. Grace panicked the moment she heard police.
Why would she be stealing? That ticket could be...
Do you think everyone can get that ticket? Chloe glanced at Grace. It wasn't in a sarcastic tone, but Grace stiffened. Uncle, that's your stepdaughter. You settle it yourself. Grace turned towards David. David thought for a bit and then asked Mr. Scott.
Mr. Scott, Bessy won't pick up her calls. Could you get her to come here?
Although he was really prejudiced against Bessy, and even regarded her quite highly, Chloe was still more important in comparison. Episode 99. The Truth About Bessy's Tickets. Mr. Scott had Bessy's number, but he had never called her before. The first thing he did was to understand the situation from Mary, Paul, and the other students. After hearing David's words, he nodded. Without saying much, he directly took out his phone and called Bessy. Bessy, who was already back at the school doctor's office, answered her phone. At this time, Marvin was walking in carrying 2 lunchboxes and a plastic bag. Mr. Scott? Bessy put on her headphones. She did not go out, but talked to him as she slowly practiced her writing.
Did you have a dispute with someone at noon?
Mr. Scott's voice was soothing and he did not sound angry at all. Bessy acknowledged and continued writing. Initially, the writing from her left hand was slow and divided into strokes. But now, it seemed to have a vigorous style of writing. Samuel silently admired it at the side. Mr. Scott paused for a moment and his voice became a little impatient.
You changed your position back?
Bessy acknowledged him again without speaking much.
How about you come over for a while? Let me clarify this first.
Mr. Scott sighed.
Mr. Smith and your mom already came by.
Sure. Bessy slowly responded. She tossed her pen aside, and it was obvious that she was not in a good mood. Instead of leaving immediately, she sat in her original position and seemed to evaluate the words she had just written. Without saying a word, her eyebrows drooped. Even someone standing far away could feel that she wanted them to stay away. Marvin paused for a moment before handing the plastic bag to Michael. He went around to Samuel, not daring to place a lunchbox on Bessy's desk, and discreetly asked him what had happened. Samuel shook his phone in front of him. After some time, Bessy finally placed her hands on the desk and stood up. She said vaguely, I have something on. I have to see my teacher for a while. Marvin felt the tense atmosphere was finally broken and finally handed her a lunchbox.
But Bessy, it's almost time to eat.
I might be back a little late. You don't have to wait for me. Bessy waved at them. Without looking back, she walked out of the school doctor's office. After she left, Samuel let Marvin and Michael look at his phone. Michael had already placed a portion of the books Bessy damaged in front of him. He was holding a pocket knife and glue in his hand. There was a dark look on his handsome face.
Should we look for Principal White?
Samuel almost wanted to go to the classroom to smash all the books.
I gave those tickets to Bessy. What does it have to do with her?
Michael lowered his head again.
No.
Samuel was a little disappointed. He wanted to stir something big. After some thought, his eyes lit up again.
I'll ask my dad to do something for the Harper family. Otherwise, he would not be able to let this go. Go ahead.
Michael picked up the pocket knife again and said a little nasally, as if he'd just woken up. Samuel looked down and realized that the cracks on the books nearby were almost invisible.
When did you learn this?
Samuel raised his head. No wonder Marvin was asked to bring glue and a pocket knife with him. Michael bit his lip and coughed twice.
Novice.
Samuel looked at Michael rather speechlessly. However, once Michael was focused on something, he would never give up halfway. No matter what other people said in the Clark family, no one would say that he was idling around. He waited for him to leave. Only then did Michael put down the pocket knife and took out a phone from the drawer. It was a very thick black phone. If Bessy was there, she would notice that this phone was almost the same as hers. Michael lowered his head, calmly typed out a message and sent it out. After a while, he replied to a few messages. When he was done, he put the phone back in the drawer and locked it again. He raised his eyes slightly. It was not as graceful as in the past, but his eyes sparkled slightly before turning cold again. Soon, Bessy arrived at where Mr. Scott was. Once she entered, anxious eyes looked at her.
Bessy.
David looked at Bessy indifferently. In the past, not only did he think that Bessy was better than Anne, but he also admired Bessy's personality. However, what Chloe said today infuriated him. He had always been kind to his ex-wife's relatives. When he reached the school, he went to look at the scene below the classroom. He immediately saw the mess of books and the desk that was thrown down. How much hatred did someone need to have to solve problems in such an insulting way? That was why David looked so cold when he looked for Grace. He was expressionless when he saw Bessy. However, Bessy was not nervous at all. She calmly walked over and stopped in front of Mr. Scott. She did not act like a perpetrator or a victim. She even spoke politely. Mr. Scott. After a pause, she looked at David. Mr. Smith. After being in Chicago for so long, David did not treat her exceptionally well, but he did not mistreat her as well. He even wanted to contribute in some areas before. Although she solved her problems by herself in the end, she remembered his good intentions. However, when David looked at her today, he did not say anything or respond. His expression was cold. Grace also knew that David treated Bessy very well. Although Bessy did not agree to join the Grant Corporation, it was obvious that David thought highly of Bessy. However, after seeing David's cold expression, a chill ran down Grace's spine.
Bessy!
Grace anxiously called out.
Why did you take Chloe's ticket? Is this all a misunderstanding? There's still time for you to tell us.
Bessy looked at her blankly. Chloe glanced at her and smiled coldly. Bessy had her hands in her pockets, looking at her as if she was not worried at all. I invited you to watch the exhibition match, but you acted disdainfully. Even you didn't think that someone in the homeroom would dare to overturn your desk, right? All three of them spoke aggressively. Mr. Scott watched them for 2 minutes before speaking.
Chloe, can I ask what those tickets are and why is it impossible for Bessy to have them?
What's there to clarify? Even Paul can't get those tickets. Do you think she can get them? Chloe smiled slightly as she glanced at Mr. Scott. Outsiders aren't even able to buy those tickets. They are tickets belonging to World Poker Tour. Mr. Scott looked at her again.
Why can't it be that someone is trying to sabotage her?
Chloe's eyes turned cold. If you don't admit it, we will meet again at the police station. Grace became nervous. She whispered in a low voice,
Bessy, how about you give those tickets to Chloe, apologize to her, and put an end to this matter?
Although David was silent, he felt that Bessy should apologize for throwing Chloe's desk down from the 5th floor. After hearing this, Mr. Scott also did not want to say anything, but turned towards the cold David.
Mr. Smith, you aren't familiar with what happened, right?
David was an experienced businessman and stood in an imposing manner. His eyes were very astute.
I don't need you to tell me anything. I know. My niece participated in a year of matches before she came back to study in 9th grade. Her results are very good, but because of today, she wasted an entire afternoon instead of improving on her studies.
After hearing him, Mr. Scott smiled. In a stern voice, he said,
From what I know, your niece knocked down Bessy's desk before finding out the entire truth. The entire homeroom knows that Bessy has a stack of books that she loves, and there are even some hard copies that are temporarily unavailable on the market now. Many of her books were damaged. Bessy should not have thrown Chloe's books out, but the first person who was in the wrong and rude should be the one to apologize first, and isn't that person Chloe?
David was startled. Chloe did not tell him all these details. He always thought that Bessy was embarrassed and angry after Chloe said that she stole her tickets and threw Chloe's desk out directly. Mr. Scott did not speak in a sarcastic tone. However, every word seemed to cut like a knife. David was so angry that he almost exploded. In reality, if he had probed a little, he would have found out about all of these things. Unfortunately, he did not ask any questions and felt indignant for Chloe. David's face stiffened. Now he was afraid to look into Bessy's eyes. Grace, who had been relentlessly urging Bessy to apologize, was also stunned. Saying all these things are useless, Chloe calmly said. In this situation, she continued to behave gracefully. The fact is that Bessy still has my tickets. Mr. Scott nodded.
Paul has already gone to get a copy of the surveillance camera tape. He'll be here soon.
Knock. Within 20 minutes, Paul knocked on the door.
Mr. Scott.
He walked in, looked straight, and gave a USB flash drive to Mr. Scott. When she saw the USB flash drive in Paul's hand, Grace tensed up.
Bessy, did you take them?
After seeing Chloe crossing her arms with a cold expression, she became nervous.
Chloe is from the Harper family, and I heard that she's a part of the World Poker Tour. How about you think of yourself and your sister? She's still there with Elise.
Bessy did not look at her. She also crossed her arms as she watched Mr. Scott insert the USB flash drive into the computer. Paul only obtained a video clip. There were no surveillance cameras in Brightbow High School. There were only cameras in the corridor, so Paul only had the video clip of the corridor. Mr. Scott fast-forwarded the clip at 32 times the normal speed. It showed Chloe staying in class for around 30 minutes. In the video, it was very clear that Bessy was the last to leave the classroom. After some time, the two boys were the first to return to the class. After around half an hour, two girls entered the class. In short, after watching the clip, it was proof that everyone else was not involved, whereas Bessy's actions became more suspicious. Chloe sneered and looked at Bessy. Bessy, the evidence is here. You were the last one to leave. Who else could have stolen my tickets and framed you? Still denying it? Bessy nodded and looked indifferently at Chloe. So only you can get the tickets and no one else can get them? Not only did she have tickets, but she also had a stack of tickets.
Bessy, that's enough.
Grace raised her voice and looked at Chloe timidly.
Chloe, I'm sorry. Bessy didn't.
Do you think that you can get these tickets just by paying money? Chloe taunted. These are tickets from World Poker Tour. Are you dreaming? Only then did David finally speak. Due to the misgivings he had about Bessy, he felt a little guilty.
No matter what, as long as the tickets are still here, it's not that bad.
David turned to look at Bessy.
Perhaps I have misunderstood you. How about you give the tickets to Chloe and I will take it as if this matter never happened?
Chloe did not agree with this idea at all. However, since David spoke, she could only stand at the side and sneer at Bessy. Bessy leaned against the desk and said, So, do you think that not letting me apologize and not reporting this matter to the police is the best you can do to pity me? David did not expect this reaction from Bessy. Chloe was amused by Bessy's reaction and laughed mockingly. Grace always knew that Bessy was very strong-willed, but at this point, she still spoke recklessly, and she wished she could shut her mouth. Bessy, how about you return me my 4 tickets? They are 4 consecutive numbers. Chloe did not want to deal with Bessy any longer and spoke impatiently. However, Bessy was startled and squinted. Well then, Chloe, you still remember the seat numbers of the tickets from the World Poker Tour, right? Bessy, you look so disgusting when you're desperate. Chloe sneered. They are number 12, 13, 14, and 15 of row 9 in Zone B. I don't want a ticket list. Are you sure? Of course. Okay. Bessy nodded. She took out the tickets Samuel gave her from her pocket. These are my tickets. Everyone please take a look. She almost wanted to laugh in anger. Initially, she thought that Chloe thought her tickets were stolen because she did not remember her ticket numbers. Unexpectedly, this girl was so proud and aloof. Mr. Scott took them. David was by his side. When he saw them, the color drained from his face. Chloe looked at the two of them and frowned. She directly took the tickets from Mr. Scott. They were stepped on before and looked uneven, but the seat numbers above were very clear. Number 8, in row 5 of Zone A. Episode 100, Paul's Opportunity. Chloe's hand stiffened. How could this be? How could you have a ticket for Zone A? Chloe looked at the ticket repeatedly. Where are my tickets then? She mumbled on as if she could not believe reality. She grabbed the tickets tightly as if she was about to rip them into shreds. Only then did David finally come to his senses. Without saying a word, he stepped forward, took the tickets from Chloe, and returned them to Bessy. He was a little afraid to look into Bessy's eyes.
Bessy, I feel guilty.
He did not clarify the situation from the start, and felt that Bessy was the first to cause trouble, so he dismissed her. He even blamed her for wasting Chloe's time. In the end, as he felt guilty, he wanted to reduce the severity of the situation as a form of an apology to her. He even thought that Bessy would feel lucky because he had decided not to pursue the matter. However, he never expected that Bessy was the innocent one from the very start. She was maligned by Chloe, and her desk and books were ruined by Chloe. Bessy knew very well that she did not take Chloe's tickets, so she felt that Chloe's behavior and words were extremely ridiculous. He felt that Bessy's actions of throwing Chloe's desk and books down from the 5th floor were normal. David even found it acceptable if Bessy were a little more ruthless. He felt deeply embarrassed. He turned to Bessy and apologized. Bessy turned around, took the tickets back, and breezily said, "It's okay." After hearing that, David's heart sank. Sure enough, things were progressing in the worst way. Paul stood next to Mr. Scott and did not say much, but when Bessy took out the tickets, he frowned at Chloe and then looked at Bessy in shock.
Chloe, apologize to Bessy.
David paused before speaking to Chloe. Chloe pursed her lips and coldly said, "But my tickets were stolen by someone." David rubbed his forehead tiredly. Just as he was about to say something, a knock was heard. A middle-aged woman walked in. Bessy was standing closest to the door. She leaned against the desk with her legs slouched lazily and her head tilted. She raised an eyebrow impatiently. When the middle-aged woman walked in, the first person she saw was her, and she looked as if she had not expected to see her there. She frowned instinctively.
Aunt Ruth, why are you here?
David turned to look at Aunt Ruth in shock. Only then did Aunt Ruth remember her purpose for coming over. She immediately took something out of her bag and gave it to David.
It's like this, Mr. Smith. When I was changing the fragrance in Miss Harper's room, I saw the tickets in the corner, and they told me that the tickets were very important to Miss Harper, so I immediately came over to deliver them.
After she said that, the entire room fell silent. Aunt Ruth paused for a moment.
Have I said something wrong?
Could it be that the housekeeper was lying to her? When Aunt Ruth found the tickets in Chloe's room at night, she was going to put them on the dresser. A servant told her that Chloe was anxiously looking for them and even gave Aunt Ruth her address. As a result, Aunt Ruth hurriedly rushed over in a taxi.
No, you didn't say anything wrong.
David did not dare look at Bessy anymore. After half a day of trouble, everything was a farce. He took a deep breath. Years of self-cultivation enabled him to find his voice again.
Mr. Scott, I'm sorry to have troubled you tonight.
Chloe took the 4 tickets that Aunt Ruth handed her. 4 consecutive numbers and not one less. At this point, the person who was innocent and implicated was very obvious. Just thinking about how Chloe ridiculed Bessy and said that David would deal with her was just plain embarrassing. Chloe's face flushed. She did not dare to look up when Paul and Mr. Scott looked at her and directly left. David apologized to Bessy again and fled. Grace squeezed her bag tightly. She wanted to say something to Bessy, but Bessy would not look at her.
Oh my God, Bessy, where on earth did you get those tickets?
On the way back, Paul had a delayed reaction. He scratched his head and turned to look at Bessy, who was beside him. Bessy was holding her phone and texting somebody. She appeared aloof as she looked down in silence. She couldn't help but cover her ear and look at Paul as he chattered beside her. Someone gave them to me.
Who would be so generous to give you something like that?
Paul walked around her and whined.
Why didn't anybody give them to me?
Samuel, Bessy casually answered. Seeing that Paul was confused, she explained again. The doctor in the school doctor's office. Paul, whom Kenneth had given warnings to countless times, was completely stunned. He was quiet for a moment.
I can't afford to offend you then.
Bessy acknowledged him passively. When they reached the school doctor's office, Bessy waved at him and went inside. The sky was almost dark. Paul went to the surveillance camera room immediately after class, and he had not eaten yet. There was no food left in the cafeteria, and he could not go out, so he bought a bag of chips to eat in Kenneth's room.
Kenneth, didn't you say it's not good to mess with those people in the school doctor's office?
Paul opened the bag of chips, sat on a chair, and looked sideways at Kenneth. Kenneth lived in a single-room dormitory and was rarely seen in the dormitory building. His room was spacious enough to place tables and chairs in it. Paul propped his legs on a desk.
They aren't people to mess with. Don't ever go there for nothing.
Kenneth did not lift his head. He flipped through his physics book with his long fingers and his eyes were cold.
If not, you won't even know how you die.
Paul placed his hand on the desk and weakly said,
However, I think that Bessy gets along very well with them, and someone even gave her tickets.
After this incident today, Paul knew that his chances of getting tickets from Chloe's hands were 0. Hearing this, Kenneth raised his eyebrows in confusion. Before he could make sense of the situation, his cell phone lit up again. He immediately put down his physics book, picked up his phone, and glanced at it. Seeing that it was about time, Paul grabbed a chip and took a bite. Seeing Kenneth like this, he could not help but roll his eyes.
Kenny, is it a message from Anne again? Yes, she sent me 2 tickets and wants me to watch her first performance at the end of the month.
Kenneth put down his phone and spoke in a clear voice. Paul swallowed his food. Without looking up, he replied,
I'm not going.
Kenneth glanced at him and faintly said,
This time she's performing a new song. I've heard a little of it from a video she sent, and she's improved a lot. You will be losing out if you don't attend it. I think I'd rather go back home to beg my dad or figure out a way for Wendy and me to dress up as 2 internal staff members so we can sneak into the match.
Paul sighed helplessly. Bessy arrived back at the school doctor's office. When Marvin saw that she was back, he gave her a lunchbox. Samuel secretly looked at Bessy's expression. Although she looked cold, he could tell that she was in a better mood than before she left. He sighed in relief. Michael also glanced at her. He slowly put down the things in his hand and walked out without surprise. At the dining table, Bessy ate slowly and thought about who mysteriously called for Aunt Ruth to come over. Very soon, Samuel sent a message to the discussion group. Samuel wrote, Good luck, brothers. I've already gotten a few staff passes from my dad. Let's meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. Photo attached. After that, he sent an address. Bessy rubbed her chin and looked at the messages thoughtfully. After dinner, she sat at the desk and continued practicing her writing. Her left hand's writing speed was slow, and she looked very annoyed. Marvin brought over a soda for her and carefully looked at her as she continued writing. He was somewhat surprised. Has she improved? Do you know who wrote this workbook for her? Samuel touched his chin and looked at Marvin. Marvin shook his head expressionlessly. Who? Ray Soup. Marvin was confused and seemed to wonder who Ray Soup was. It was the old man our family requested a watercolor landscape painting from 5 times last year before we got it. Samuel tossed his pen aside and leaned back. With that, Marvin finally recalled who he was. Are you talking about Mr. Soup with the eccentric temper and overly expensive items that rarely sells his work to others? Yes, that's him. Michael snapped his fingers. Only then did Marvin look at Bessy in shock. Michael asked this Mr. Soup to write a few words for Bessy to practice writing. Samuel squinted his eyes and finally whispered, Marvin, let me ask you. If it were your grandpa instead, how confident would he be in hiring this Mr. Soup to write a workbook? Marvin's face stiffened. A word may be possible, but a workbook? It's nearly impossible. The two of them realized it at the same time. They looked at each other and were deep in thought. How did Michael manage to hire him? In the Smith family, Thomas was the first to leave to study in the capital. David did not return that night. Instead, he went to the Smith family's old house. In Daryl's study, David sighed before saying in shame, Dad, I did something poorly today. He sounded a little tired. What did you do? Daryl rarely saw David like this and put down his teacup with a blank look on his wrinkled face. It's a personal matter. David recounted the events that happened today. He spoke concisely, but got straight to the point. When he was done, David lowered his head. At the start, when you told me to pay attention to Bessy, I still chose to prioritize Anne and did not dare to tell you anything. However, now that this happened, it's impossible for our family to pay her back well. Finally, he sighed again. I don't know how I will face her in the future. Daryl did not immediately respond. After a long while, he frowned slightly. You messed up this time.
but those tickets from World Poker Tour, how did she get them?
David did not know.
Forget it. Things are already like this.
Daryl was calmer than David.
There are so many talents in the world. Who knows what changes there will be in the future? With an IQ like this, who knows if she can seize the opportunities in the future? You also said that Bessy is not good at her studies, which shows that she has no direction and is reaching from what is beyond her grasp. She may suffer a harder fall in the future.
After some thought, Daryl continued.
Elise told me yesterday that the chance of Mr. Grint accepting her is 90%. It may be good that Elise is different from Bessy, as this will spare you some troubles.
At the end of the day, businessmen prioritized the benefits they could gain.
I got it.
David raised his head.
I'll personally apologize to her tomorrow regarding this incident.
Daryl nodded lightly.
Anne's performance is at the end of the month. How many people are attending? Her mother and Thomas. I'm busy with work, so I'm not going. Okay.
Daryl replied. After Bessy was done with her writing practice, she went back to homeroom for the evening self-study period. Homeroom was very quiet as usual. No one had cleaned up the pile of 9th grade books downstairs yet. Bessy placed the original book that she carried from the school doctor's office on the desk again. Mary looked at her in surprise and realized that a large part of the book had been restored to its original form.